Jim Lighting, you have had a lot of experience, your company, I should say, with the needs of China as they have emerged over the decades, whether it be DDGs or ethanol. We know corn and soybean. What do you see how much do they need? What do they need right now? Does it play a role in their strategic, how they're going to handle themselves in this particular conflict?
From what I understand, they have really shifted back to an emphasis on food security, and domestically they had actually incented away from corn. If you roll the clock back 5 years ago, they had excess inventory in the government and it was spoiling. They have worked that down to the point where we saw an increase in imports of U.S. corn. They came back to the market because they got their domestic supplies under control. Now they're back to incenting their producers for more acres and increasing their domestic production. And so I believe we're going to see somewhat of a reduction. But with Brazil having a smaller soybean crop this past year and some of the supply issues that are not only affecting the U.S. but affecting Brazil as well, there's some really unique things as to where will China be able to source, whether it be soybeans or soybean meal or whether they domestically have a good crop, and how much corn and feed grains are they going to need. So a lot of uncertainty, and anytime you are dealing with China, you truly don't want to count on them being your primary export market, because China is an unreliable buyer. And so I think there's big question marks as to what we see, and part of it is dependent on the supply chain as well as what type of a growing year we have this coming year.
Okay. And Rob Elliott, it's interesting because for years during these ag roundtables, we've talked about China's investment in other countries and their infrastructure, whether it be roads, bridges, ports. Maybe there was a strategic thought to this with President Xi Jinping.
You bet. Exactly where I wanted to go there, Vanessa, because the Chinese, as Jim said, are very shrewd, and they are pretty strategic in how they approach things, and they're not going to be your friend too closely. They've made significant, this Belt and Road Initiative, I believe it's called, and significant investments around the world in infrastructure, be it in South America, Africa, even in Cuba, that they're going to try to source from wherever they can and not be too reliant on only us here in the U.S. And you'd mentioned Commodity Classic. I'll put in another shameless plug here, but last week was celebrated a bit in our recent infrastructure bill, the new lock and dam at Lock 25 north of St. Louis, where the Illinois and Mississippi come together. So part at a last minute call to the White House with push from Congresswoman Bustos and Senator Durbin and Duckworth, that got put into that infrastructure bill, but that will allow for shy of $750 million that will build a new 1,200-foot lock down there on the Mississippi River. Just part of our aging infrastructure that we've let go, and if we're going to be a major world player in the future, that waterway piece is so important. We bounce down the road and hit the potholes, but very few of the voting public really realize the importance of that inland waterway. And I used this at Chris's meeting the other day for the bank, but a barge holds 52,000 bushel, which is equal to 55 semi-loads of grain, 18 3,500 bushel rail cars and a 15 barge tow, which is what's typically out there on the river, is about 780,000 bushel pushed by one tugboat. So you can see the efficiency that comes about with that inland waterway mix. So that will allow a new 1,200-foot lock will allow a 15 barge tow to go through that lock without having to tear it apart, put pieces of it through individually, then put it back together, the danger, the expense, and everything else that goes with that. So a huge win with that Lock 25 on the Mississippi.
President Wyatt from Monmouth College, please correct me if I'm wrong. I believe you did a dissertation back in the day on the Vietnam War. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Take us for a moment, compare the situation then to now. I know Representative Swanson talked about the 1940s was probably the last time of this magnitude we had seen an effect, but China's was certainly somehow intricately a part of that conflict too at some point, or at least thoughts about them, or at least I remember something about them. I can't put my finger on it. You're the expert on it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Chinese government, the Russian and the Soviet governments supported the North Vietnamese government at the time and during the Vietnam War. So that's certainly the case. And I think a lot of good comments made at the table today about the situation. And I think it's part of what I wonder is how permanent will some of the reordering that's taking place right now be. I think on the one hand, you can think about, okay, is this really the demise of Russia as a significant power? I think perhaps it is, at least for the foreseeable future. Certainly Russia is isolated. It's isolated economically. I think it's isolated for the most part politically. It's isolated, I think, morally for the most part in the world. How long will that last? I think that will last for a while. We've seen great unity among the NATO countries and other countries outside of NATO that we would regard as the Western world. That's a wonderful thing to see. How long will that last? Can that unity? It would be great if that unity and cooperation could sustain and could go into other realms more than just the immediate response to the emergency in Ukraine. If you could have greater economic cooperation, if we could have better sourcing, better market cooperation among these countries that have come together for this specific purpose, if that could last. China, again, we've talked about China a lot, and specifically it is probably the two most for the long run, the two most dangerous places in the world have been the demilitarized zone on the Korean Peninsula and the Taiwan Straits. I think, probably every president's nightmare has been sending the 7th Fleet into the Taiwan Straits. What will China do? Will they be cagey? Will they just, will they do what the Russians and Soviets used to do? Probe here, probe there, never get too far out in front, don't provoke a response. Certainly the lesson they ought to learn from Vladimir Putin is that if you overplay your hand, you're going to lose. But China obviously is far stronger in every sense of the word than Russia was. Will they overplay their hand? I don't think so. But I think what they are going to do is be more emboldened to push us on every place. They're going to continue to build those fake islands in the South China Sea. I've got a particular interest in Vietnam, and the Vietnamese have been butting heads with the Chinese for decades over that, as have the Philippines. Will they be more aggressive in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative? Probably. And how do we counter that? Those are some of the big questions that I have.
And the islands, are you referring to the military bases that they're making
Yes.
literally in the ocean?
Yeah, naval bases and air bases as well.
Yeah, I just unfortunately learned about that a little while ago. That was concerning.
Yeah, claiming all of the South China Sea as their territorial waters, or as my friends in Vietnam call it, the East Sea. They don't acknowledge that China has anything to do with it.
Do you think China is politically and morally, you said Russia, economically, politically, morally challenged. Do you think China's thinking about that, if that could happen to them? Obviously, economically isn't the case.
Yeah.
Do you think they care?
Well, I think I think they care to the degree to which it affects their larger ambitions. I mean, China clearly wants to be the dominant power in Asia. And they're going to take advantage of what's happening in Russia, because let's remember, Russia is a continental, it is a Pacific nation as well. They're going to take advantage of that, and as much as they can against Russia. But if they will, yes, they care to the point, to the degree at which it affects that larger ambition they have to dominate Asia. It galls Xi Jinping that the United States has a military presence, such a strong military presence in East Asia and the Western Pacific. That's why they have spent so much money over the last 15, 20 years to build up a carrier fleet. They have a carrier fleet that doesn't quite challenge ours yet, but it's getting close.